Let me welcome once again panel 7 entitled Xenophobia, Discrimination and Nationalism during COVID-19. And may I invite the convener, Professor Saul Takahashi, to take over the floor, introduce himself and the panel and the topic for today. Thank you. Over to you, Saul.
Okay, thank you, James, and thank you very much for this opportunity, and thanks to everybody who's come to listen to the panel. I think we have a very interesting panel here today, and I see our other member, Nukila Evanty, has also arrived, so that's great. So we have a full panel now. The panel is going to be, the panel is titled Xenophobia, Discrimination and Nationalism during COVID-19. We're going to have one presentation that is going to look at Southeast Asia in general, and I think in particular, the situation in Indonesia with vaccination discrimination in particular. Then we're going to go on to Japan. I'll have a presentation on the general situation in Japan, nationalism, xenophobia within COVID-19. And then we'll have a combined presentation with 3 speakers that will be looking in particular at the Olympics and how that has played out under COVID-19 in general. Now, I don't have the information available to introduce everybody. So what I would suggest is maybe that everybody just gives 1 or 2 words about themselves, to introduce themselves and what they do now, if that's all right with everybody. Perhaps Nukila, is it possible for you to go first? Is that possible? Just a few words to introduce yourself.
Saul, I think Nukila is still getting online.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
okay, so there's some
the other colleagues can go first, yeah.
Okay, right, fine. So maybe why don't we go just in no particular order. Right next to me is Richard Miller, Professor Richard Miller. Perhaps Richard, go ahead.
Sure, good morning, everyone. I'm Canadian. I live in Kobe, Japan, which is not too far from Osaka. I haven't been to Thailand in a couple of years now. I haven't left Japan in a couple of years, which is becoming very problematic. But through things like Zoom, I'm really glad that we can all meet and have a conference like this. So thank you very much for having us. I'm a professor at Osaka Jogakuin University, and we're going to be talking about the Olympics, which is, I think, a timely. The 2020 Olympics was just finished now in 2021. So I'm looking forward to this. I joined yesterday and some fascinating presentations yesterday. Thanks.
Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, then it's amazing. We've been using Zoom every single day for over a year now, a year and a half, and we still do this. Right, so how about Zane? How about you? Over to you.
Thanks, Saul. I'm Zane Ritchie, originally from New Zealand. I've been in Japan here for about more than 25 years. I won't say much more than that. I'm an associate professor at Josai University, just outside Tokyo, in a place called Saitama. I'm in the contemporary policy studies, and I teach history and community development. Nice to meet you.
Right, great. Okay, Michael, then? No, Michael's.
My name is Mike. My name is Mike Parrish. I'm originally from the United States, and I've been in Japan, again, about 25 years. I currently teach at Kwansei Gakuin University basically in Kobe, Japan. And I teach English and Spanish, and I'm also teaching business as well.
Great. So, okay, great. Thanks very much. Nukila, are you ready now? Can you say just a few words?
Yes,
please?
Good morning, everyone. I think my voice is rather echo. Good morning, Saul, Zan, and Michael, and Richard. Did I miss them? Okay. My name is Nukila Evanty. I'm from Jakarta, from Indonesia. I'm currently as the executive director of the Women Working Group, and also the members of advisory board at RMIT University in Australia. In Human Rights and Business and Human Rights Center. So I'm happy to see all of you, and yeah, back to you, Saul.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And just a couple of words for myself. My name is Saul Takahashi. Believe it or not, I am Japanese, but I spent a long time in the United States, as I'm sure you can tell. I also teach at Osaka Jogakuin University. I teach human rights and peace studies. I do a lot of teaching on Palestine, where I lived for 5 years, and on human rights in general and human rights in Japan. I neglected to mention that our panel is actually being sponsored by our institution, Osaka Jogakuin University, so I should not fail to mention that. It's a very small women's university in central Osaka, the second city of Japan. It's a very small university, so we are able to give very individual attention to our students. Most of the education is done, most of the teaching is done in English. The graduate school is completely in English. So we have a very international student body, and I should advertise that. So if anybody's looking for a graduate school, then do please keep us in mind. Right. Okay. So as I said before, I thought maybe that it would make the most sense, Nukila, if you went first, because you'll be talking about Southeast Asia in general, as far as I understand, and also Indonesia in particular. And then we'll move on to our presentations on Japan, if that's all right. And just for everybody's benefit, of course, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion after we do all the presentations. I think that makes the most sense. Okay. So on to you, Nukila.
I need to check my PPT.
Are you able to share or?
Yeah, let me try. Okay. Where is it? Okay, share screen. Okay. Can you see my slide? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Once again, Professor Takahashi and the panelists in this panel, and also friends of Asia Center, all panelists and friends and guests. On this occasion, I will deliver a presentation with the title Obligations of Business to Make COVID-19 Vaccination Accessible. The obligation in this context that I will explain are the specific rights and duties is a legal bond, vinculum iuris, by which one or more parties, obligants, are bound to act or refrain from acting imposed on the obligor a duty to perform, and simultaneously creates a corresponding rights. I would like to show you the figures of vaccination figure in Indonesia. In this first picture on the left on my side, with a population of about, Indonesia has population of about 272,248,454. The number of people fully vaccinated is 32,804,000. And if you see in the second picture, the person vaccinated with one dose are 58,721,000. According to the government, the aim of the national vaccination program are to reduce the transmission of COVID-19, reduce morbidity and mortality due to the COVID-19, for herd immunity to be created quickly and evenly throughout Indonesia. Then for the implementation of the COVID-19 vaccination, the government, my government has set a number of vaccines. The Food and Drug Supervisory Agency, or BPOM, we call it like that, has issued an emergency use authorization, or EUA, for 7 COVID-19 vaccine in Indonesia since January 2021 until now. The 7 vaccines that have received EUA from BPOM are Sinovac, COVID-19 vaccine by PT Bio Farma, AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, Moderna, Pfizer, and Sputnik V. Each type of COVID-19 vaccine has its own character, for example, the number of doses and intervals of administration. Furthermore, there are 2 types of vaccination that currently governed by the government. One is vaccination program. It's a vaccination to the community whose funding is borne or charged to the government. The type of the second one is what you call mutual cooperation vaccination. This is like we call in bahasa Indonesia is vaksin gotong royong. So the type of mutual cooperation vaccination must be different from the type of COVID-19 vaccine used for program vaccination. So the second one, this is my the context, yeah. So the context of my paper, one, I will divide into three, two. In this COVID-19 vaccination, the most important context is the rights of the people to be vaccinated and can reach essential workers, those with higher risk of being exposed to COVID-19 due to the nature of their work, like a doctor, nurse, etc. And all the most vulnerable and marginalized people from a health perspective, as well as social and economic perspective. And business responsibility in the context of its obligation is to comply with national and international legal standards of protecting human rights. Why business is important in this situation? One, because business or private sectors appointed as distributors, they are the vendors, they are traders, supplier of vaccine. That's the first one. The second one, private sector or business has lead digital health in the access for vaccine. And the third one, issue of inadequacy of transparency regarding national vaccine with the administration and management things. And for lack of prioritization to the marginalized, the poor, who already have difficulties with the complex of economic and social situation, and to find out a vaccine. Based on the ministerial regulation, we have ministerial regulation, Minister of Health, regulation number 10, on the implementation of vaccination priority. There are group of vaccine recipients, such as health worker, elderly people, vulnerable communities, etc. However, in reality, for example, transgender communities or groups of migrant workers who just arrived because they were sent home due to the lockdown situation in various regions in Indonesia cannot receive vaccination. Many of them do not have an identity card, while the government used the population identification numbers or NIK as a database of vaccine recipients. Obligation of the business. So the current situation of vaccination program in every country is a test case for me for national level regulation and international human rights guidelines. The company obligation and responsibility in vaccination program and implementation Indonesia are regulated in one national regulations, which I will explain later. And the second one, international regulation, such as I'm going to mention about the UN Human Rights Guideline for pharmaceutical companies in relation to access to medicine. Actually, this guideline can be used to inform pharmaceutical companies' approach to making COVID-19 medical products available and affordable. This guideline highlights key risks pharmacies companies should respond to, including intellectual property and pricing risks. It also identifies practice companies should avoid and information they should disclose by limiting the use of confidentiality clauses. And then this UN guiding principles on business and human rights, UNGP BH. Yeah, this is a guideline for business enterprise should respect and protect and remedy for human rights. For example, the companies, the business must actively identify, mitigate, and make effort if there are communities where they operate that have not received vaccination. The next one is the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, or ICCR, which Indonesia has ratified in Law Number 11 of 2005 that requires states to achieve progressive realization to protect the rights in the covenant, including the right to health, both individually as well as through international assistance. I would like to highlight the comments from the Committee of Economic Social, general comment of the Committee of Economic Social and Cultural Rights, or ICCR. They said that everyone is entitled on an equal footing with others to enjoy access to all the best available application of scientific progress necessary to enjoy the highest attainable standards of health. So there are World Business Council also, a guideline, World Business Council for Sustainable Development for CEO to promote human rights. This international human rights covenant related with business highlight that to provide vaccination more accessible, free and affordable and good quality and adequate supply of vaccination, and then to enable people, particularly to the marginalized and vulnerable people, to have vaccines. And this is the regulation, the policies that place business obligation and relate to vaccination. We have Presidential Regulation number 14. I think this is the current one regarding vaccine procurement implementation that assign to state-owned enterprises, and then direct appointment to the provider of business entity, then cooperation with institutions and agencies on research and supply of vaccine. We have a health ministry regulation regarding the implementation of vaccine in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, highlight legal entities also, business entities, that they should take vaccination to their employees, their families, their other related individuals, to, and then they have to report it to the, we call it Kadin, Kadin or some, like a association of the businesses. And then the third one, Governor Decree number 1966 concerning social restriction movement level 4 COVID-19. This degree is the mandatory regulation to everyone who carry activities in particular sectors to have vaccination against at least first dose of to be vaccinated. Yeah? And this is the practice of 3 companies that I researched currently regarding in COVID-19 vaccination. They already conduct vaccination for workers, particularly for frontline workers. They conduct vaccination for employees' families also. Conduct vaccination for outsourcing workers, for local residents, mostly for the mining companies. And then they carry out vaccination to the community around where the company operates at the location. And I found that the challenge are some staff don't want to be vaccinated because of hoax issues or disinformation, and because of some religious belief and xenophobia. Sometimes like like Sinovac and Sinovac from Chinese, made in China, and some of the communities, they really hate, really afraid of Chinese, so they said, oh, this from the one that we hate, so they refuse to vaccinate it. And data from the Ministry of Health is not sufficient to segregated data on who already have been vaccinated. And then unclear guideline and policy from the government and a lack of socialization and campaign to the community. Also, vaccination is somewhat less involving civil society. It seems like this is like a domain of the government, without involving the academia, the civil society organization, etc. And then lack of use of corporate social responsibility or CSR in the implementation of access to health and vaccination. So while we have the law, we have many law regarding the CSR. So the CSR should allocate or should participate in community program or something like that. All right. This is my last slide. For my conclusions, based on my my presentation, it needs a different approach, to address vaccination, to prioritize more to marginalize the poor, vulnerable people, and then reinforcing this as a great disaggregated data for vaccination, based on gender, for instance, based on not only disabilities, but also those living in the rural areas, disadvantaged areas, that should be documented in the data. And then the third one is policies still need to be improved, which are some regulations that are not really clear in the aspect of protections and responsibility of business people or companies or private sectors. And then CSR or corporate social responsibility allocation approach to reach more people who will be vaccinated, health access, and then advocacy for groups that still refuse vaccine because of hoax and xenophobia. And then the last one is business and civil society should be hand in hand together to carry out a vaccination program that is more transparent and responsible measures. I think this is all of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Back to you, Saul. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Am I still mute? No, I'm okay. Great. Thanks. That's wonderful, Nukila. Thank you very much for that very enlightening presentation. Okay, so you've stopped sharing the screen. That's great. Okay. So thanks for that. Like I said at the beginning, we will have plenty of time for questions and answers after all the presentations. So do please jot down those questions and keep them in your mind. I think what we'll do now is we'll move from Indonesia to Japan, and we'll start off, I think I'll go first to talk a little bit, give a little bit of general context about what's been going on there. So let me just share the screen. How many times have we done this? Right. Right. Okay. So this. Okay. So you've all. You can all see the screen. So I'm going to be talking about xenophobia and nationalism in Japan under COVID-19. I think a lot of people, or some people at least, might be surprised when they hear Japan and xenophobia in the same sentence. I very much doubt that the people on this panel who live in Japan are going to be surprised, but that's certainly something that many people outside of the country don't necessarily associate with the country. Of course, Japan is not a physically violent country. That is to say, the rate of physical violence is pretty low compared to other countries with comparable populations or economies. But xenophobia is very much alive and well. And I'm also going to talk about nationalism and how that has been playing out under the pandemic. I want to, at the very top, anybody who's lived in North America or probably most English-speaking countries, or at least from a particular generation, will remember this song, which is, I think, Sam Cooke, What a Wonderful World. I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of xenophobia and nationalism in Japan, but I don't think we're going to have time to really dwell on that kind of stuff. So, but I think I like this line because it provides a little bit of an overall framework for what I'm going to say and what I think the situation is very much in Japan, but a general ignorance of the history and the kind of things that have happened in Japan in the modern day. And also, I'll talk a little bit about how xenophobic notions have affected COVID-19 policies in sort of racialistic, biological way. Now, the UN Secretary General and other international actors have already pointed out several times that the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a resurgence of xenophobia in many countries, and that foreign nationalists have often been blamed for, quote unquote, bringing the virus here, spreading it amongst the local population like that. This was certainly, I would argue, exacerbated by the widespread panic, almost hysteria, surrounding international travel and the closing of international borders, which WHO has never recommended as a sustainable way to combat any kind of pandemic. And it was largely, I think it's pretty largely ineffective, I think it's fair to say. But Japan added a new dimension to this. Japan really took this to a new level when it banned the entry not only of foreign visitors, but also of foreign residents. So people who had been living in Japan with, working, studying, or whatever for extended periods of time, not tourists. Holders of Japanese passports, on the other hand, like myself, we were allowed unrestricted re-entry into the country, regardless of where we had been and for how long. So, for example, you have a foreign resident who's lived in Japan for, 20 years. Over 20 years, and they had, just by chance, they might have been visiting their relatives when this policy had been announced, and they were barred from returning to their home. Whereas a Japanese national who had been living abroad, again, for 20 years, 30 years, whoever, they could just swan in without the need for quarantine or anything. It's worth pointing out that this is a pretty blatant violation of the right to return to your own country, which is stipulated in Article 12 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Japan is a state party. And it's of course, nonsense. I mean, clearly nonsensical in terms of any kind of policy to combat a pandemic. There was barely a peep of protest against this policy. I mean, first of all, it was barely covered at all in the mainstream media. Basically nobody made a big deal out of this in any way, shape, or form. Just a few organizations, mainly of foreign residents. And this was the prevailing policy for quite a while, until September last year. Again, the policy is clearly nonsense from the point of view of preventing the spread of the virus. There's no way, there's no way on the face of this earth that a virus chooses whom to infect on the basis of race or national background. But the knee-jerk reaction of the authorities in making this policy and implementing it, I think it shows the ignorance and arguably the xenophobia behind their attitudes in general. This only applied to people re-entering, of course. Fortunately, it didn't. They didn't go around to foreign residents who had been in the country and kick them out. But you're abroad visiting your family. There's no kind of there was no big announcement of this in any serious way. So you had people attempting to come back, and they were barred. It was all just really ridiculous. Now, there were relatively low numbers of infections during the initial stages of the pandemic. We're talking about early 2020. Many believe these numbers to be suspect, myself included, as it was widely believed that the government was intentionally keeping the numbers down for the Olympics, and we'll hear more about the Olympics in the next presentation. The whole Olympics issue is a big one. But more importantly, the policy seems to stem from and also fortifies narratives of foreigners just being, inherently more susceptible to infections. And this is another sort of popular narrative that has really permeated through the public discourse. It's always been there in Japan, but it's come out in a very in-your-face way over the pandemic. This notion that, foreigners are inherently less hygienic. They're less considerate of others. We're just cleaner than them. And these narratives, they're repeated over and over and over in the mainstream media. And they very much came to the forefront in the popular discourse. Those foreigners, they don't wash their hands like we do. They don't wash their bodies like we do. They're dirty. They don't take their shoes off when they enter the house. Can you imagine? They don't wear masks like we do because we're considerate people. I remember one TV show, and this was a sort of a quasi variety / news show that was going on at great length with some alleged expert with a straight face going on about how more spittle is emitted when somebody speaks English rather than Japanese. Now, this was when North Italy was being really hit by the pandemic, and nobody bothered to point out that North Italians don't necessarily speak English on a daily basis. But, those kind of, who cares about facts when you have these kind of convenient narratives? Now, perhaps even more insidious I would say, is the narrative that, the corona won't be a big problem. This is very prevalent in the early 2020. Corona won't be a big problem in Japan because we, unlike foreigners, we Japanese, we're obedient. We follow the rules. When the government says, oh, you should be considerate of others and wear masks, we do it. Unlike these foreigners, they don't know how to follow rules. They're too individualistic. They're too selfish. They do whatever they want, not like us. And this is, again, a very sort of very prominent narrative about us, Japan as a nation, and the kind of people we are. And this was, came out very much at the forefront. Now, these newspapers, I think I'm just going to show you, so this is another one of those things. Now, these ridiculous notions, they disappeared very quickly and very quietly as numbers actually started to explode in Japan. And now we have a rate of infection that's pretty comparable with many other countries. This graph, it's a little bit difficult to look at, I'm sorry. But if you see the daily infections from, I just chose from the beginning from January, and these are the daily infections from 15th of March 2020 to 15th of April. Now, on the average, there are only 17 infections a day reported from January, from the start of the pandemic. So really almost nothing. And we're going through at double digits until 15th March. Now, on 24th March, the decision was announced to postpone the Olympics. Again, I'm sure we'll hear more about this from our next presenters. Now, instantly, literally from a couple of days later, there's an instant explosion into triple digits, average 331 infections already between the 25th of March to 15th of April. So you can see this dramatic increase. And anyway, that's way over in March, way at the left end of this graph. And now we're here. You see the right. If you can sort of get a sorry. If you can see aside. So anyway, these ridiculous narratives they've just disappeared, and rightly so. But that's all that is. It's not funny, but it could be almost funny. But more concerning, I would argue, is how the right in Japan has exploited the pandemic to strengthen these nationalistic, very anti-Chinese narratives. I know that I'm a little bit short of time. But I want to stress, first of all, that the right wing in Japan they're not nationalists in an almost true sense of the word. They are very much pro-American, and they see they see Japan's place as a partner in the American military alliance. Now, scholars of disciplines like post-colonial studies, they know more about this kind of thing than I do, and they've written studies about the psychology of the colonized and how really bullish nationalists, extreme nationalists, when they lose in war, then all of a sudden they become the lapdog of the guys that won over them because they thought they were the strongest, and now all of a sudden it turns out that they're not. So it would be very interesting if they looked at this kind of psychology in Japan as well. It's almost a post-colonial case study. But ever since certainly the 1990s and definitely the early 2000s, China has really been the boogeyman throughout the media, and I would also include the tabloids, of course, just the boogeyman for everything, any kind of social ill, economic ill, social ill, and security threat. China has been portrayed over and over and over, and really entered the popular discourse as a threat. It's a social threat, it's a security threat, it's an economic threat. We don't really know, but it's a threat. And this has had, this has just been emphasized over and over, not by a lunatic fringe. I have a photograph here of the lunatic fringe, but not just by these kind of people, but also by very powerful actors in society, conservative politicians, prime minister, and very powerful politicians, and very influential commentators that have very close contacts with those kind of people. I also want to point out to the potential for domestic oppression that this has also brought. And I say that, again, we don't really have too much time to explore this in great detail, but ever since 2012, with the very nationalistic governments that we have had, the whole narrative that Japan harbors this group of traitors, Hannichi, they are called. I would actually include myself, so maybe we are called anti-Japanese, and this includes left-wing organizations, opposition politicians, human rights organizations, left of center media. There's this constant emphasis about how these people are anti-Japanese and how these people are treacherous or useful idiots, mainly of the Chinese. I have this. I have an image here of one book, Red Japan, and you can imagine what it says, critical of human rights organizations and many local governments and left of center media. Now, these narratives also have real life consequences in terms of international relations. I just put as one prominent example, the quadrilateral security dialogue, US, Japan, Australia, and India. And this is actually a Japanese initiative that has been pushing forward very provocative joint military exercises and all sorts of other stuff. Japan has been trying its best to be the next merchant of death through increased weapons exports. It hasn't been that successful yet, but it's probably just a matter of time. And the whole sort of issue of China being a threat has been the prism in which a lot of international events have been viewed in popular discourse, and in particular the framing of the coup in Myanmar has been looked at it really from, human rights has taken a backseat, almost been completely ignored, and it's all been about how can Japan remain to make sure the Chinese don't take over and we don't make as much money as we used to. So, all of these kind of nationalistic things have been very much amplified under the COVID-19. The Wuhan virus, many of these right-wing commentators have been talking about, the virus as being a biological weapon that was intentionally set loose by the Chinese, all this kind of stuff. So this has really entered the popular discourse throughout the pandemic, I would say. Now, given the economic ties between Japan and China, and also the US and China, I would say, the notion that there's really going to be a shooting war is, in my mind, kind of fanciful, and certainly big business in Japan would definitely not want that. But it's worth stressing that with this kind of bullish nationalism, there's always the danger of the genie getting out of the bottle. Once it gets out of the bottle, you can't put it back in, and you have these nationalistic forces that get out of control of the politicians that let them loose in the beginning. So that's something that I think we all need to be very concerned about. Okay, I've gone over my time, so I will leave it at that. Just advertising my books. This is a book on human rights in Japan from 2019, and thank you very much. Right, so sorry, I think I went a little bit over my time.
Well, thank you very much for everything. Again, my name is Richard Miller. Michael Parrish and Zane Ritchie will be talking next, and it's a very interesting follow-on to Professor Takahashi's fascinating presentation as well. So we thought we were watching the Olympics come up. We were thinking about what's going on, and we decided to sort of look at the Olympics from students' perspectives, but as a backdrop. And in order to do so, for this particular conference, I started in I guess July. The three of us were working on getting surveys out to students, and that's really what the basis of our presentation is. But it's also all about the Olympics. So the title of ours is Nationalism in Sport: The 2020 Olympics in the Context of COVID-19. And we actually, Michael Parrish and I were in a used shop, found this very interesting. I think it's actually a sticker, but it turned out
it's an old matchbook cover.
It's an old matchbook cover. That's right, Michael. Thank you. So, but we thought that fit really well with what we're doing. So, thanks. So, we'll move on to modern Olympics, right? And so this is something that we started looking at. Modern Olympics really was the beginning in of course 1896 with the kind of bringing it back into Greece, and the big thing was the Athens 1896 and this was sort of at the apex of globalization, as we're talking about 2 decades just before the really bad First World War, which sort of ended everything. And Edward Bernays mentioned that I put it in here, propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government. Although this time it's sort of, and as things progressed, we can see that it became part of the Japanese government, and there was really no secret about it all. So next slide. So Michael, did you want to start with this one?
Well, I think that the ideal of the Olympics, as restarted in 1896, was the mythology of the Olympics is that even when countries at war, even when Grecian states were at war, they would stop a war and then have the Olympics, and if apolitical and promoting humanitarian and sort of broader narrative of sport as a equalizer. Unfortunately, it's always been Olympic Games are always a point of national pride and get intertwined with narratives of superiority and national pride. And then by 1936, with the rise of Nazism, it reached its apex of blatant nationalism, and so the Nazi Party had their symbols intertwined or intermixed with the Olympic symbols, and a lot of their architecture and their symbology were drawing justification from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, that tradition, and so they took this opportunity in as a huge propaganda boost to justify their cause and the war they're about to start.
Yes, and Zane, sorry, and of course, back up, Zane, and it was also the rebirth. This was a kind of an interesting thing, right? So Germany's back after this devastating Great War is what it was called. So that's an interesting thing that will come with that Japan will be coming up to, but with their first Olympics that actually took place. But within the Nazi Party, they had also implemented the architect of the Nazi regime was directly involved. Hitler was directly involved, and they even had their propagandist. There was Leni Riefenstahl. She had done a number of different films, but Olympia was really one of them. The other interesting thing was what was one of the big factors were that it was the first time things were broadcast televised. Things started to get televised at that time. This was really an interesting period, and this was really where, as Michael or Professor Parrish had mentioned, the big direct propaganda. Thanks. Okay, Zane.
So before we get on to the Japanese Olympics per se, I'm just going to introduce a very brief history before we get to that stage. So as you know, as you may be aware, that Japan was closed to Westerners for from contact with other countries for over 200 years. And period, of course, the Black Ships 1853 forced Japan open under gun diplomacy. 1868, Japan opened into the shogunate. And so we had with a new government looking to modernize Japan to make it a great power comparable to the West. And we had three slogans here. Fukoku Kyohei Wakon Josai, then Bunmei Kaika. And these are basically, the first one is enrich the country, enrich the armed forces, or make a stronger armed forces, civilization and enlightenment, and the Japanese spirit and Western techniques. And the purpose, as I said, was to transform Japan from a feudal system into a modern industrialized society based on Western institutions. And so what happened was that from the Meiji onwards, they started sending scholars and experts to Western countries to learn from the West and bring those ideas back to Japan to strengthen Japan. And in 2000, I'm getting a little bit off track, but 2000, I wrote a paper looking at like Japanese intellectuals who was sent to study in the West. And this one is, one of them is Initobe Nazo had did a study on he wrote a book called Bushido in 1899. And basically he was starting this stage of trying to portray Japan as being equal to the West, and we're not. I think Saul mentioned the kind of animosity toward China. But even from that time, they're saying we don't want to be associated with the Chinese, and we are not Chinese, we're equivalent to the West. And actually he wrote about Bushido, the way of the warrior, if you like, having this kind of a chivalry, like a Western chivalry, if you like, using Western sources. He didn't use Japanese sources. So he's painting a picture of Japan, being equal to the West, and so should be recognized as being equal. And so what happens is that Japan won a series of wars, the Sino-Japanese War in 1894, 1895 against the Chinese, and in the Russia-Japanese War 1904, 1905. And so Japan was quickly transforming itself into a military power and asserting itself in Asia, and actually making a case for colonization. And so the way they looked at it was that if Western powers are allowed to have colonies, so should we. And so this started with the colonization of Korea, for example, in 1910. Yes, so basically, what they're saying is we're superior to other Asians and should be treated by equals. And so at the same time, the importance of education and sports became a very big thing in Japan, sports and nationalism, also based on a Western model. And one of the architects of this movement in Japan was called, he was Kano Jigoro, who was, he actually invented judo, I think, and he was in the Ministry of Education. And what he what he wanted to do was focus the emphasis on physical education to make a stronger nation. Basically what he did, he got involved sending Japanese athletes to the Olympics, right? The first Asian nation to take part in the Olympics. I think in 1912, I think it was in Stockholm, they sent 2 athletes from Japan, first time to participate in the Olympics, I think it was, and they came dead last. I think the marathon runner dropped dead, or he passed out or something, or they never heard from him again, I don't think. But there was a national kind of a shame. And so from that instance, moving forward, they really started to push this notion of physical exercise and get involved. And they actually wanted to bring the Olympics to Japan. And so next slide. So this is actually the part on, maybe it's an Olympics you haven't heard of. It's the 1940 Olympics. I called it, it's actually in Japanese, it's called Moborashi. I think it's called, is that right, Saul? The Olympics. So it's called the Illusionary Olympics. I translated it like that. So basically this Olympic Games, and you can see the Nazi flag here, and this whole notion of pushing for nationalistic ideals. And basically, Japan actually has been wanting to hold the Olympics. I think they've applied 11 times, right? 11 times, and it's unsuccessful, and they were successful 4 times, right? And 1940, what they did back in the day was that they had the summer and winter Olympics together in the same country, and it was meant to be in Sapporo and in Tokyo 1940, and this was actually going to coincide with the 2600th anniversary of the first emperor, and really appealing to the Japanese nationalism, and getting and using the people, if you like, to promote this notion of peace, even though at 1937, I'll get to in a minute, they invaded China, but and this is one of the, I think this is also Gijiro-san and Kano-san, I think, put this out: as young people from all over the world gather in a corner of Asia, the world will enter a new beginning of peace. Right. And but the actual purpose was to show the emergence of Japan as a world power. And so sports has become really enshrined with politics, right, and nationalism. And so and this one here.
And you can see the imagery.
You can, the imagery,
Nazi salute.
Let's go back. Yeah, the imagery here.
The Nazi salute and the.
That's right.
And the focus on sort of military images in with the Olympics.
That's right. And you see here the Bushido warrior as well in this image here, right? And so basically, though, what happened was Japan had already invaded Manchuria, of course, early 1930s, but and the West were quite concerned about this, and militarism was pushing forward, and concerns of nationalism in the West. Actually, Britain, I think it was decided at the Berlin Olympics actually to award the Japanese the games in 1940. And actually, the IOC was wined and dined. I think it was a French guy, I forget his name, actually, head of the IOC, was wined and dined in Japan 1936, just before the Berlin Olympics, actually. And so I don't know if there was some under the table bribes, et cetera, that went on there. But Japan was awarded the Olympics, except there were concerns of nationalism in the West and a fractured political power in Japan, rise of the military influence in the government. And military actually had members in the JOC, Japanese Olympic, or the I think it was called the Olympic Organizing Committee at the time. And so this was creating a lot of issues. And so what happened was, though, that this Olympics, actually, that's why it's called the Illusionary Olympics, it never took place. And what happened was in 1938, Japan pulled out. The cabinet, they pulled it. The Olympic Organizing Committee, it wasn't, or the IOC didn't cancel it. It wasn't the international community canceling it. It was Japanese cabinet pulled out. The reason for that was that in 1937, the Japanese invaded China, and they needed all of the resources for the war in China, and it led to a lot of austerity and the nationalism movement, obviously. And they actually, most of the facilities by 1938 weren't even completed, and I read that a lot of the facilities were either very basic or they didn't have the materials for them. They're all sent to China. And so a lot of them were actually even made from very thin timber, if you like, very flimsy timber and stuff. So it wasn't even ready. And so they actually pulled out due to budgetary concerns, 1938. And incidentally, 1943, the Olympic Stadium they had built for this students, university students, conscripts were actually assembled in the stadium and sent off to fight in the war from the Olympic Stadium. So that was quite interesting. And just to leave you with a quote before I move on, it seems obvious, this is Kelly 2011, it seems obvious Olympics of 1940 would not have served to legitimize the ultra-nationalistic nationalist politics of the time, just as the 1936 Berlin Olympics helped the National Socialists to gain international acceptance. So that was my final quote here. So I'll just move on.
But 1943, Zane, you were going to mention?
1943. No, I mentioned it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's where the students were actually sent off to fight in the war conscripts from assembled in the Olympic stadiums. So that's how it was used in the end. So, yes. Okay. So next. Moving on to nationalism and capitalism. I think that's Mike Parrish.
Just briefly, because we're going to go back. One of the most iconic neon signs in Osaka is a candy company that makes a kind of caramel, and they have the Olympic runner. And ironically, it's the Olympic runner might have been modeled not on an Olympic runner, but on a Filipino Olympic runner who was the first Asian to compete in Olympics or win a world championship. But the similar idea of using the Olympics to promote your product in and a symbol of strength and vitality and energy is quite common. And the sponsors, billions of dollars of sponsorship and were spent on any product had an Olympic sponsor. And so I think there was a financial incentive in spite of the COVID to keep it going, because there was a vested interest from businesses that we've to not see it, to recoup their investment.
Sure. There was also the NBC rights that had been, pre-sold, and the financial repercussions of canceling the Olympics were too high. I mean, this is what one of the arguments was. But again, going back to what we had heard earlier, the Abe government, the previous prime minister, he'd had a number of initiatives, the Abe initiatives, and an unspoken one was the Olympics. And this is sort of a revival, or we come back to this revival situation, and we'll talk about that with the 1964 Olympics, which was the first one that they had. And, it's very similar to the 1936 Olympics. But here in 2020, it was a revival after the collapse of the bubble economy. And the bubble economy collapsed in 1989, 1990. By 1991, it had actually really started to deflate. So we have here in Japan what's called the lost decades. In other words, economic growth wasn't where we wanted it to be. So is the lost decades. Now, so this was the comeback of Japan, how Japan is.
Well, actually, Richard, that goes back to the 1941. So it's all about the rise of Japan as a world power.
Yeah, absolutely.
1964, 2020. So they're all very, very connected, actually.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
So another reason they probably didn't want, they were dead against canceling the Olympics, because that actually happened in 1940. So that's another reason, I think, as well. There's no way they were going to be canceling these Olympics.
Oh yeah, no, I never said that they were going to cancel. They would not cancel them, and this is part of it. And so, and there's all this national pride and everything else. So let's go to the 1964 Olympics. And Michael, did you want to talk a little bit about this?
We'll just start with you can notice quite a difference in the imagery, and it's still about national pride, but in terms of technology and interesting architecture and a focus on the sport and the athletes, and less on and I mean, maybe judo was introduced as the Olympic sport at that time. I'm not sure.
Right.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
So focuses on. And then the main symbol is just a simple Japanese flag, not the imperial flag, and so it's all sort of toned down. The propaganda is a bit toned down, a little more austere, and focus on rebirth, re-entering the world stage as a innovator, creator rather than a warlike state.
Sure, and there was the bullet train had, been introduced as sort of this super fast train. It was Japan, arrived on the world stage.
Well, Japan had been bombed. Tokyo, a lot of Japanese cities were razed completely and firebombed. So this was huge for Japan.
Yeah, obviously, Zane. Yes.
But an interesting, I was listening to a podcast last night. One of the interesting symbolism was the person who lit the Olympic flame in Tokyo in 1964 was a young man who was born on the day of the Hiroshima bombing. He was born on August 6th, 1945, and he lit the Olympic flame. So that was a big symbol of Japan coming back from the war and Japan having been a victim.
Moving on.
Okay. And again, I'll continue with the symbolism. I didn't notice it before, but now when you put them together, that the current symbol has at the center the chrysanthemum, the royal emblem, the flower is the emblem of the imperial family. A symbol of Japan is the cherry blossom, and then there's a kind of stylized cherry blossom in the 2020. So trying to keep some of the same symbolism. That's about it.
Well, there was, so what happened was, obviously with the coronavirus, there were a lot of different things going on with whether we should cancel or what should we do. Go back to a year and a half ago, the 2020 Olympics were coming, except the coronavirus. So this was something that there was a lot of pushback. By the time the Olympics happened, there was the vast majority of Japanese did not want the Olympics. They wanted it canceled. This is after it had been postponed. It was postponed in the spring of 2020. So the 2020 Olympics were taking place in 2021. So due to time, I just realized we're running out of time. So what I'll do is I'll quickly go through what we thought. So during this time frame, what we wanted to do was to survey students. Now, this is from a major university, one of the largest universities in Japan. It's located in Western Japan. And this particular university is quite interesting. The president, they changed the name of the university. During his lecture or during his university-wide speeches, he wants Olympics medals. He wanted Olympic medals. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize to raise the sort of the standard of the university. So one of the things that they've put a lot of money into are the sports programs. For the sports programs, the students will go to classes in the evening. So they'll start at about 5:30 at night. 4:30 at night and end at 9:30. During the day, all they do is practice. These students are the sports scholarship students, one of the largest programs in Japan. Actually, I think it is the largest currently. So we got a survey of those students and what their perceptions of the program of the Olympics were. Quite interesting that they're all obviously very interested in the game. Some of the students that I actually have, I'm a part-time lecturer there. They'd gone off to the Olympics. One had gone off and participated in the Olympics, was not a medal winner, but some of the graduates were medal winners, and I did recognize one. So of course they're very interested in it, but there was a lot of worried about it. There was a lot of things that they think that some of them strongly agreed, but some of them strongly disagreed. So there was a mix. Now these students are obviously going to be very biased in our perception of what the general overall public was, but the overall public's perception at the time was definitely to cancel the Olympics or postpone them again because the coronavirus was starting to spike up again. Mike, did you want to make any comments? Yeah.
No, I mean, so the student athletes agreed with the cancellation or the postponement quite strongly, although.
Okay. Yeah, Mike, and I've just been. We have to wrap up in about a minute. So we're going to write this up. We'll write up the results of our survey. We had a number of different questions. We'll have that in the thing, but there's, obviously a lot of mixed feelings, and these are the sports kids, right? So these are the sports scholarship. They're the they're the age cohort for the Olympics. These are the students who had a vested interest in participating, and their friends were participating. And I mean, obviously they're real, very, very interested. So the Olympics, what were some of the, so again, we'll give you some of those. Okay, Zane, you can go right to, yeah. We're running out of time. Again, we'll put these in these will be in the conference proceedings that you can sort of look at if you're interested. So some of the fallout, though, this is from this is still going on today. And so the Paralympics just finished a week and a half ago. So, one of the things was Suga, our prime minister, has resigned. He's still there, but they're looking at getting a thing. It's interesting that this is part of it. And Reuters has, the media is blaming him. Whether it's part of him or not, it's really hard to say. But I mean, part of the COVID and the Olympics, but certainly the mishandling, the perceptive mishandling of it, certainly is something that the future we might have a better view of. The other thing is the cost overruns. The cost overruns of this Olympics were anywhere from 111% to 244%. So what we're doing is and I'm from Canada, and and I grew up in 1976. The Montreal Olympics were one of these big white elephants that had taken place. 1976. That took them until I think about 4 years ago to pay off the debt. So Japan is being burdened with this, of course, with the postponement, everything's getting worse and worse. Zane, back up. And so things weren't there. But you can see whether there was a fourth wave or not, and whether they were trying to, whether they were supposed to, whether there's a correlation or not is something that is debated, but it's certainly there. Okay, thank you. I think we're out of time.
All right, thanks.
Thank you very much for stopping.
Right, okay, thank you. Thanks very much for that very comprehensive overview of the Olympics and how it has been used.
Somebody's got a question?
Yes, I see somebody's got a question. So what we're going to do now is maybe if you could, okay, good. So what we're going to do now, I think, is we will take all the questions that people will have, and I see we already have one. Let's see. I just want to see if I can have a little bit of an overview of everybody to see if that's the only question. Okay, I think that may be the only question. Of course, also please feel free to type through any kind of question you might have through the chat. But I see we have one question, and again, this is we're open for questions for all the panelists now. So please, yes, go ahead. And if you could just say, if you could just introduce yourself also and say your organizational affiliation, if any, and go on with your question, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Saul. I would like to introduce about myself. My name is Mardi Santori from the Center for Legislative Drafting, the Indonesian House of Representatives. That was an interesting presentation about the Xenophobia and nationalism in Japan under COVID-19. I'm just wondering about the presentation from Nukila. Nukila deliver about the Indonesian context in Indonesia particularly, and it's about the marginal people. How to identify the marginal people to be vaccinated, or how to categorize vulnerable group to be given a vaccine. That's the first one. And the second question is about the how to deal with the vulnerable people who are reluctant or reject to be vaccinated. Is it clear? I think so. Okay, thank you very much, Paul.
Yes, so please, Nukila, go ahead, please. Yeah, okay, you've muted your mic now. Okay. Nukila, you're still muted. I know it's amazing how we still do this, eh? After almost 2 years. Okay, yes.
Thank you for the questions from Marty. During this COVID-19 pandemic, I don't know why my
You were fine before, so maybe it's the handheld mic that's the problem.
thank you. During this pandemic, COVID-19, there are several groups that are left behind, that are not being touched compared to the general populations. It's this marginalized and vulnerable groups, what we call, are the one who are not have enough access to the health, social, and economic sectors. So that's why we need to identify during this pandemic those who are really left behind in terms of in the sector of social, for instance, health, like a health worker, right? And then from in the social sectors such as indigenous peoples, and then the migrant worker who return to come back to our country, and then transgender people, those who don't have the NIK or identity card. This one that what I categorize as marginalized and also the vulnerable people. Also, there are some groups like disabled people, and then minorities, minority peoples, and others that should be tackled. And then to get the same right with the other population in terms of vaccination. This is the first question, I think. Yeah? And the second questions regarding how to deal with the those who refuse the vaccination because of hoax or religious belief. I would like to answer that this is the roles of all stakeholders, like educators like us, and then governments and business to do some. Also, the media is very important to conduct to campaign for the about these issues. Education is very important, awareness raising, and then to engage more with the universities, with the universities to to ask to convince those who refuse in terms of hoax. For the religious belief, is quite a difficult one, because it needs continuous and consistent education to them, to campaign, and then to use also the religious leaders is very important, or cultural leaders, like those who are those in Indonesia, we have the culture like the one who really we are really depends on that person, like kepala suku, we call it like that here, or indigenous, like indigenous leaders, religious leaders. This is the one that we can advocate to these leaders, so that later this religious or cultural leader, I can say like that, can also embrace, engage with the those who refuse based on the belief. I think these are my answers. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Nukila. we still have a little bit of time. Are there any other questions? Oh yes, Richard, go ahead.
Sorry, there was a question posted, and
Okay.
I was actually looking it up but the question was about hate speech towards the athletes, and so the JOC was monitoring it, but they never actually, I can't find where they've explained what they found, but they did warn that they would be monitoring hate speech during the Olympics. That was the JOC. I hope that answers the question.
Right. Okay. All right. Great. Thanks for that. Are there any other questions from the floor? I don't see any. So maybe, actually, I have a question for Nukila. Actually, Nukila, you mentioned you were talking a little bit about the responsibilities of businesses to respect human rights. I also worked in business and human rights, so I know a little bit about that. I'm curious about what do you think the obligation of the state is, though, under these circumstances? I mean, what does the Indonesian government have to do to increase the rates of vaccination, and also to make sure that marginalized people receive more of them receive vaccines?
Because this is under the UN Guiding Principle of Human Rights, or UNGP, is the duty bearer of the human rights. So the government should conduct in terms of policy to formulate the policy, to draft the policy. This is the crucial one for the duty, because in my presentation there are some loopholes on that regulation regarding the protection of the people, the marginalized, and how to reach those who are left behind. So that's the first, and accountability as well. So the government has to make sure the businesses, this private sector, that they will follow. They also conduct vaccination to their, at least their workers, their people where the companies operate about that at the location. And then also the responsibility of the state, the government, is to also to make sure the data, because it's my observation, the data is still lack of data, because it's only divided into like a general population, and then the health workers, and then disabled and elderly, whereas there are so many others groups or people that are still undocumented, and there is lack of data regarding what's the challenge, how far the vaccination program are the government already reached this other population, like migrant workers, transgenders, and others. So in terms, I would like to conclude my long answer is the government, the state, in this vaccination program, the government should make a enforce the policy, implement the policy, and formulate or draft the policy that is lack of protection, and then also to make sure the businesses doing their works in line with the regulation that have been published by the government, and ensure the marginalized with the not only disabled people, elderly, but also the other marginalized and vulnerable people got vaccinated at the end, because Paul, we have 273 million people. It's not easy one, but I believe that government will I'm sure the government will do that by the end of maybe this year.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much. And then we have another question for you. Michael, you want to elaborate on that?
I'll defer to somebody else.
Okay. Well, there's another. There's actually one more question for you, Nukila, from the floor. What is the role of the Chinese embassy in responding to or addressing the negative sentiment to Sinovac in Indonesia? The person is asking because in Thailand, the Chinese embassy goes on TV and they've issued press statements apparently saying that Thai critics of Sinovac are harming Thai-Sino relations. Just very briefly, if you have any insight on that.
Yeah. Regarding the, I'm not really sure what because this is like a politics, you know, maybe highly politic between our government with the Chinese embassy. But I think this is not the role of the Chinese embassy as well. This is the role of of us to because to convince that all the vaccine is the same, Sinovac, Sinopharm, and then Pfizer, Moderna, or something like that. It's the same. Is to you know, to create herd immunity, to support our health during this pandemic situation. This is what we can do, and I hope that more campaign, good campaign, more education, not only from the it should more engagement with the media is very important, because the media can, you know, can publish every day, every single day about the good things about vaccination programs, and not you know, do not instigate like a hate or racial or discriminate some toward the news about the good or bad things about one vaccine. I think all vaccine is the same. And then yeah, it's good for everyone in Indonesia.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much for that. Now there's another question that's to me actually from the floor. We have it in our chat. Is there vaccine hate in Japan against Chinese vaccines or other foreign manufactured vaccines? We don't have Sinovac in Japan. We only have Pfizer and Moderna. But yeah, I mean, if I remember correctly, Sinovac was it was issued. It was announced before those other two, and I mean, I certainly I don't think. Yeah, I mean, there was a general idea that there's no way that we're going to import a Chinese vaccine, and I guess, you know, one could say that, you know, there might have been xenophobic notions behind that. Again, I'm not a public health expert. I can't tell you which if any of these vaccines works better than the other, but I certainly think there was no, you know, nobody took it seriously. Nobody was ever saying, oh yeah, Chinese vaccine sounds like a great idea. There was a very negative reaction, I would say. And I guess it was also not just because of the thought of the Chinese vaccine being Chinese not working as well, but also the notion that they are increasing their international influence through making a vaccine and, you know, distributing it to various countries. Japan also did that. We don't have a nationally built vaccine. That's something I will also talk about. But for sure, you know, Japan donated, I can't remember how many tens or hundreds of thousands of doses to a number of countries. Taiwan was one, I think, you know, very subtle there. Another one, I can't remember. It was what a country in Southeast Asia. I can't remember. Maybe it was Malaysia.
Indonesia.
Was it Indonesia? Okay, great. So, you know, Japan also did that in a very transparent and what I would say almost half-hearted.
AstraZeneca.
Was it Astra? Yeah, it was.
Because of the blood clots.
Yeah, but we don't have AstraZeneca here in Japan. That's what I don't really understand.
No, they had it. They got rid of it.
All right, they had it and they got rid of it, but
they gave
because
it
we're not using it here in the country. Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, the point is, you know, and that was a very transparent effort to counter Chinese influence, I think. That was pretty obvious. And it was pathetic given the fact that our vaccination rates at the time were still very, very low. So there was quite a lot of criticism of the government for that, on the government for that. We don't have a domestic manufactured vaccine, which is another thing which people have been up in their arms about. I think, the Japanese pharmaceutical industry, I am not an expert, but I know that there are a lot of issues. Yeah?
Can I say something? Novavax are working with Takeda, I think, to domestically produce the vaccine. So the Novavax vaccine, so that's coming.
Yes, I know. I was going to say that it is coming, but it's not here yet, and it's not going to be here.
That's great, right?
In any way, in any sort of, in the near future. And I think that, but that was, like you say, that was one of the things that people were up in arms about. That we have a pharmaceutical industry; it's a significant industry, it's a big one, and we should be, our industries should be better than the Chinese. There's no other way to put it. I think that's the general notion that a lot of people have, and the notion that the Chinese pharmaceutical industry has made a vaccine and we haven't been able to do it is a real sort of slap in the face, I think, for a lot of people. So anyway, are there any other questions?
I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
For Nukila. Many times governments make strong suggestions or recommendations but they don't really have any teeth. There are no consequences. What has Indonesia's governor been able to do to either encourage through some kind of promotion or discourage through some kind of penalty compliance with the vaccination requirements or vaccination recommendations? So what carrots or sticks do they use? My connection is.
We heard you, or at least I heard you fine. I don't know, Nukila, did you have trouble hearing the question that Mike?
No, I'm fine. The government. Thank you for your question, Michael. The government has a lot implied so many regulation policies and programs regarding mandatory for vaccinations. So what including there is like a penal for those who refuse to get vaccinated without any convincing reason, like if you have health issues, it can be you cannot be vaccinated. It's only for those who refuse and there is no reason and it's mandatory. It's mandatory except from in certain circumstances regarding this issue. So
there's a fine or some kind of finance. You have to pay a fine or you lose a benefit.
Yeah, my understanding is that the fines is only locally. Yeah, I want to ask my friend from because we have friends here from the parliament. Maybe he can help me to answer this question.
I think was that Marty who made the comment, asked the question before? Yeah, or maybe no, maybe not. It's another colleague, maybe.
Test. Thank you, James. Actually, this is the issues that I will or my topic tomorrow.
Okay.
Legal, yes. The legal aspects of Indonesian government to handle the COVID pandemic, and there are two issues. I think first about the fine and the criminal sanction. Actually, there is criminal sanction for the people who not comply to the law or regulation related to to handle the pandemic. It is based on the law on health quarantine. The second one is in Indonesia, related to the vaccination. There is an issue whether the vaccination is contradict to the human rights. This is the very social debate in Indonesia. But to me, vaccination program is not contradict to the human rights issues, because pandemic COVID is social issues, not an personal or an individual issues. I think this is like a little response for me. Maybe tomorrow I will give more detail on the legal aspects, because my topic is legal instrument towards the pandemic COVID-19 in Indonesia. Thank you very much.
I look forward to it.
Great. Okay. Thank you. And thank you very much for that answer. We have, I think, 2 minutes, which allows us maybe time for just one really quick question and one really quick answer, if anybody has.
Yeah, Saul, this is here as from Asia Center. Maybe at this moment, it'll be remiss of me not to, draw attention to my picture behind Nukila together with Dr. Innocentius. This is simply to say that not only are we present in Indonesia, but as Dr. Innocentius mentioned, tomorrow morning, the expert agency of the Indonesian Parliament, the Indonesian House of Representatives, headed by Dr. Innocentius Samsul, who is the head of the agency, will explore the legal, physical, and accountability mechanisms in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic in Indonesia. So this is just a plug there, but I'll just pass that brief time over to Robin for his remarks.
Good. Sounds good.
Thank you, James. I found all of the presentations very interesting. Of course, there's a common theme across them of the fear of the other. And so xenophobia is, the extreme version of that. And of course, there are violent forms and so on. So I found your presentation interesting regarding the history of the Olympics and relating it to the history of Japan, because the fear of the other goes back very deep in the history of Japan, even before the emergence of the modern state, going back to Tokugawa, Ieyasu, and so on, and the closing off of Japan. So, and it's interesting that the Olympics, despite their, supposed unifying potential, that different forms of xenophobia manifest themselves through the Olympics, whether it's anti-Black, whether it's anti-Chinese, whether it's anti-Japanese. By the way, the Japanese in 1919 had asked at the Treaty of Versailles in Paris at that time to have a clause inserted on racial equality, and it didn't happen. And so they went away a bit miffed that didn't happen. And finally, I thought it very interesting that the Olympics of today, as you pointed out, Saul, you still have this fear of the other very much present, expressed through ideas, the Indo-Pacific and the Quad, et cetera, and the vaccine issue. So thank you all for your very interesting linked presentations.
So once again, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Professor Saul Takahashi and colleagues on this panel 7, convened by Osaka Jogakuin University, and with also speaker Nukila Evanty. So thank you very much.